Okay, this is Make Something Happen number 14. Gosh, in this one we're going to have a look at let, var and const. Now these are things that if you use them wisely, they can make your programming much easier and less prone to things going wrong. Now this is stuff that, yes, just makes you into a... Later on in the course we'll look at professional development and what makes a piece of code professional rather than sort of stuff you write for fun. And this kind of technology is the stuff that makes code actually what I might call proper. And so let's have a look at this. Now what you've got is a website which you can go to with your browser. No need to run Visual Studio Code in this one, and it's begintocode.com code, and we're looking for the variable scope example in the build interactive pages chapter 3. If I go back here, you can see that this is the home page for the site. If I drift down here, it's remember where I've been. So if I just go on there, I'm back in here. Now there are a bunch of functions inside the JavaScript code. Let's open developer tools and take a look at what those are. So here you go. Now we can take a sneak peek at the sources of the code. If I just drop down this thing here and look at the sources, I can take a look inside the index, and you can see each of these functions is declared inside the code. Now it's all in the book, which of course you have all rushed out and bought. Fantastic. But we're going to take a look at each of these functions in turn and see what they do. I'm going to do that from the console. So go into the console tab, and the first one we're going to run, the first one is called Let Scope Demo. Now this is a variable that, as it says in the script, I've got a script in front of me, this is lovely. This is a variable which is, if I have a look at the source, let's go, here we go, the very first one. We declare a variable called I, then inside an inner block, because you can put blocks of code in JavaScript programs, we make another I. So we've got an inner I and an outer I. And if I run this function, so we go let scope demo, let, and it's helping me as it always does. Hit tab and then go boink boink and hit return or enter. And it says the inner variable is 100 and the outer variable is 99. If I look at the code, that actually makes perfect sense. I make 99 on the outer one, I make 100, and then I print it out, and then I leave that block. And when you leave a block, all the variables declared using let are disappeared. They go away. They're no longer usable. And so in the outer block, we revert to using the outer version of I. Now this shows a thing called scoping out, which is where you make a variable in an inner block with the same name as an outer block variable, and that means you can't use the outer one anymore. It's kind of invisible. Now this is a very common feature of programming languages, and it allows you to sort of not have to worry when you're in here about interfering with other variables in the code, because you're making your own I, and anybody else's I outside this block is completely untouched. So that's kind of sensible, and that's what you want to do. If we work with that, that's fine, but there are other ways you can make variables in JavaScript, and the other way to do it is to use a thing called var, which is what we're talking about in the chapter. And we have a var scope demo, and if we look at the source, sorry to keep jumping about, the var scope demo, exactly the same structure of code, except this time I've made a variable using the keyword var. And it's really important that you understand the difference between these two, and it's one of these things you just have to learn, because it's sort of, you've got to figure out the context in which you're going to use them and when it's sensible to use either. So let's just have a look at what var scope demo actually does. Var scope, it's helping me again, isn't that nice? Oh, if only I could use the tab key properly. Go down to there, press tab, and now I've got that, and I can close off the brackets and hit enter. And this time both values of I are the same. Now I remember setting it to 99, so what's happened? Look at the source, and we find that yes, we did make a variable called I, 99 in the outer block. Then in the inside we made another one. And what happens here, and this is the important difference between the two, is that var, once you've made it, it exists pretty much everywhere. and if I change the value of it, even by making a new one, then I'm changing the same thing. So this value here will be overwritten by actions on the var I in the inner block. We've just seen that happen. And so this is kind of crucial because it means that the stuff in here is fiddling with the stuff out there. Now, if you're used to programming languages which just don't ever do this, and there are quite a few out there, some of the languages like, well, I think Java's a case in point, as is C# and C++. They don't tend to let you do this. You might find this a bit surprising, but it's just the way that JavaScript rolls. And it's one of these things that you have to learn about when you're learning Java, because it is useful, but it's also a little bit confusing and iffy. So inside a function, the rule is, generally speaking, if you're making something that's going to live in a block and live nowhere else, then you should use let to create that. And var is the stuff that you want to have shared throughout the entirety of the function, which means that we declare it at the top and then use it everywhere else. And it will be the same thing everywhere. There's no scoping out. You don't scope out of var because it's always there. It's always the thing. So I'm hoping that makes sense. I'm hoping it helps. You just have to think about why you want to use these things. Basically, let is a way of making sure things are more private, and var is a way of making things a little bit more public. And if you sort of start from that point and then look at the code, that'll probably help you the most. So let's keep going. Let demo, what's that all about? Let's have a look. Let demo, next one down, that uses let inside a block and then tries to use it outside the block. So I'm making I in my inner block, making it, and then I'm trying to print it out. Now, you might expect this won't work. At least I hope from what I've said, you will expect it won't work. So let's see if it fails, and if it does, what happens when it goes wrong. Boom. Yes, this time it's saying, you've declared a variable called I inside that block using let, which means that as soon as you leave that block, the variable will vanish. So here, even the editor can spot this. Here it's saying you can't do that. That's naughty, because there is no I at that point. I has gone when that block had finished. So let's move on and do exactly the same thing with a var. And if you've been paying attention, oh, please pay attention. It makes me feel that much more wanted. If you've been paying attention, you should already know what's going to happen when I go var demo. You should know, because when I make a variable using var, it exists from then on until the end of whatever context it's created in. So that will just work. So I've done something which, and if you're a C# programmer and you look at that and you go, ooh, you wouldn't like that because I shouldn't exist outside this block. But it's the way JavaScript works, and it's absolutely fine. But you must know about it, because it actually controls a fundamental behavior of the program, which is what happens when you go off and get a variable. So there you go. That's global demo showing you that I can make something, sorry, var demo, I can make something inside a block, and then I can use it outside that block. And so you've got this little mental image now, which is making perfect sense. Now I'm going to do something which completely and utterly upsets your entire view of the universe. Look at the function global demo. Now that makes a variable called I, but it doesn't say let or var. It just says I'm making a thing called I. Whoop-de-doo, watch me. What happens now? Well, let's run the function and see what happens when I go global demo. This is exciting, isn't it? Well, exciting for me. It just works. Well, yes, so missing everything off means, well, it just works. Isn't that lovely? And to make things even more interesting, if I now ask the console, which is quite determined not to let me type lowercase I, let's try again. If I ask the console what's in I, it tells me 99. In other words, this function here, this innocent little function here, has actually made a global variable that exists across the entire program. And we go, ooh. So I've told you many times that variables shared across the entire program are kind of open to abuse because they can be viewed and changed by any code in that, which makes it hard to control what happens to individual things. I've told you that. I've told you it's a bad thing. And now I'm showing you that in JavaScript, if you make a mistake and do nothing, you get the worst possible outcome. That I will be shared across the entire program, which is not good. Now, the reason this happens is because JavaScript was not invented as a programming language for writing really secure code. It was supposed to be easy to use. And one way to make a language easy to use is not to have to declare variables when you want to use them. So if you just use a variable without any kind of let or var, it basically just makes one, because that's what the original JavaScript used to do. And that's what many JavaScript programs out there in use at the moment still do. So we can't turn it off. But what we can do is the next thing we're going to mention, which is the strict approach. Now, we can make a modified version of JavaScript. We're now using a version which is sort of quite a few, 4 or 5 versions, maybe down the line. And every time a new version of JavaScript comes out, they add some bits and pieces. Let and var were added later because they improve the language and they make it possible to be more secure, as does strict. I can tell the JavaScript interpreter to be strict about my code and not let me do things like declare variables without saying let or var. And that's what this string of text in strict global demo actually says. It says, don't let them do the things that we think might be dangerous. And that fundamentally changes the way that this function will be compiled. And if I try running strict global demo, which does exactly the same as what global demo did, except that now it's in strict mode, I get undefined. I get something which is, hang on, should that have caused an error? I would have liked to have thought so. Let's have a look at the code again. Yeah, that should have caused an error. I don't know what's happened there. If I go oh, I know why it's worked. It's worked because, why has it worked, Rob? Well, it's worked because I've already done global demo. So there's already an I lying around, which I made previously. If I reload the page, which is what I'm going to do now, boop, all the variables are thrown away, everything goes away. And now if I do strict global demo, this one will give me an error. Boom, it'll say it's not there, you didn't make it. Now that's interesting. That's gonna I used to teach in front of audiences of 100, 250 people, and I used to do this kind of thing in front of them, and they used to love it when things went wrong, because when things went wrong, they were going to learn something slightly interesting and also get to watch Rob under pressure. You've just seen that. What we did was we ran global demo, which made us a global I, and then we made strict global demo. I'll show you the source, which says, okie dokie, put something in this I, and the I is already there. This illustrates the kind of danger. The I has been made because this function here running that made it. So if I do it straight after, it'll just work. So, but if I reload the page, all the variables are thrown away, and that means we get a clean slate. And at that point, strict global demo will fail. I'm going to have to change that in the text, because I'm going to change that to make a variable called K or J, which I know doesn't exist at that time. So I will do that, but I'm going to leave it in this as a kind of bonus behavior. So you're actually part of the creative process now. Isn't that amazing? In the text in the book, it will now say K, because I'm going to change it to another letter, so that people running it at home don't have the same problem. But you folks who've taken the trouble to listen to this screencast or watch it or whatever, you're getting a bit of extra bonus there, which I think is lovely. So let's go on to the last bit now, which is const demo. Now, constant variables are things you aren't allowed to change, and constant variables kind of a bit like I think the word is oxymoron. It's a statement which contains within itself a contradiction. My favorite was always mature student, which yeah, okay. Moving on. So a constant variable isn't really a thing. It's just called a constant. And the reason why you do it is that sometimes your programs will have things in them which you don't want to have changed. You might have strings that refer to things. You might have paths. You might have constant values. You might have things like pi you want to put in there because everyone likes pi. 3.14159265 if you like, and you might put that in, and you don't want someone changing pi. That would be bad, so you make it a const. So let's have a look at const demo. Let's do that finally from the console. So I'm going to go const demo, and let's see what this one does. It blows up, because if you look at the source, quite rightly, and even my editor, even my source code view is telling me that's a bad thing to do, Rob. Once I've made I constant, I can't change the value of it. And so by default, I tend to try and make variables constant, because that means I have to sort of really think hard about whether I want to change it or not. And you'd be surprised how many of your variables in your programs don't change when you start doing this. But the bottom line is, we're doing this because we want to try and make our code a little bit safer and a little bit less prone to error in terms of mistakes that we're going to make while we write it and while we work with it. And so that's Make Something Happen chapter 14, with a bonus bug which will make you treasure the experience even more. But thank you for staying to the end, and now on with the rest of the book.